My husband cheated with both my younger sisters. He left when I exposed him. Years later, he came back only to learn his most painful lesson. You could say it all started when I was 17. I wasn't the type of girl who had big plans or dreams. I was just trying to get through school without much drama, you know. My parents were always more focused on my sisters, Lisa and Jenny, so I kind of just did my own thing. I got myself a part-time job at a bar to earn some money, which honestly was more like an escape from home. The place was nothing fancy, just a small spot where the locals would come to hang out, but it felt like freedom to me, like I had my own little slice of life outside of the mess at home. One night while I was working, this guy came in. Mark. He was a regular at the bar, and he seemed friendly enough. I didn't know his age at first. I figured he was like maybe 21, 22 tops. He had this boyish look, kind of charming, and he knew how to make people laugh. We got to talking every time he came in, and he started to stick around longer. At first I thought it was just small talk, but then he'd wait for my shift to end so he could walk me to the bus stop. It felt nice having someone pay attention to me, especially since my family hardly noticed me. Looking back, I should have been more cautious, but when you're young and someone makes you feel special, you don't think about all the red flags. We started dating, and I thought I'd finally found someone who saw me for me. My parents weren't thrilled when they found out, though. They didn't like the idea of me dating someone older, but they didn't make a big fuss about it either. Maybe they figured I'd rebel if they did, or maybe they were just too wrapped up in whatever my sisters had going on. Either way, I was stubborn, so I kept seeing him. We dated for about 2 years, and by the time I was 19, I felt like I'd known him forever. Mark would tell me how mature I was for my age, how different I was from other girls. I ate that up because in my head it was like I was proving everyone wrong. My sisters were the ones who always got the praise for everything, but here was this guy who thought I was special. It was everything I wanted to hear. One night after my shift, he took me out to this spot by the river. It was quiet, and you could see all the city lights reflecting off the water. It felt like one of those moments where everything clicks, you know. That's when he proposed. I was caught off guard but also excited. I mean, I was 19 and felt like I had my whole life ahead of me, and he was promising me the world. I said yes, and we decided to get married that summer. My parents were pretty quiet about the whole thing. They showed up to the wedding, sure, but it wasn't like they were cheering me on or anything. I remember my mom pulling me aside before the ceremony, asking if I was really sure about this. She said something like, "You know there's no going back once you say those vows." I shrugged it off, told her I knew what I was doing. In my head, I was convinced they just didn't want me to be happy because honestly, I was used to being the one left out. The wedding itself was small. Mostly just close family and a few friends from work. We didn't have the money for anything big, but at that point I didn't care. I was just excited to start a life with Mark. After the ceremony, we moved into this little apartment on the other side of town. It wasn't much, just a one-bedroom place with a tiny kitchen, but it was ours. I felt like I was finally building something for myself. The first year or so was good, really good. I started working at a retail job while Mark kept his job as a contractor. We talked about all the things we wanted to do, like traveling and maybe buying a house someday. It all seemed so possible back then. We didn't have much money, but we were making it work, and I was happy, or at least I thought I was. When I turned 22, I found out I was pregnant. I wasn't planning it, but when I told Mark, he seemed excited. We were a team, after all, and having a baby felt like the next step. We started setting up a little nursery in the apartment, even though there wasn't much space. We painted the walls a soft yellow and put up some cheap decorations. It was simple, but it felt like we were creating something special. But you know how they say things can change fast? That's exactly what happened. It was little things at first. Mark started staying out late more often. He had to work overtime, he'd say. I tried not to think much of it because, hey, we needed the money. But then he started coming home smelling like perfume that definitely wasn't mine. I'd ask him about it, and he'd brush it off, saying I was being paranoid. I wanted to believe him, so I did. The pregnancy wasn't easy. I was sick most of the time, and with Mark being out so much, I felt like I was handling everything alone. My parents weren't really around to help either. They were too busy with my sisters and their lives. I was exhausted, and I started feeling like I was invisible again, just like when I was a kid. Things got worse when I was about 8 months pregnant. I remember sitting on the couch feeling like a whale, and Mark walked in acting all distant. I asked him if everything was okay, and he snapped at me, saying he was stressed about work and that I was always nagging him. It hurt because I wasn't trying to make things hard, I just wanted to feel like we were still a team. But every time I brought up anything, it turned into a fight. After our daughter was born, things didn't get better. Mark was there for the birth, but he was distracted the whole time, barely looking at me or the baby. I tried to brush it off as him being overwhelmed, but deep down I knew something was off. He'd come home late and avoid talking about where he'd been. Sometimes he'd just stare at his phone for hours, barely acknowledging I was even in the room. It was like I didn't exist to him anymore. One night, about a month after our daughter was born, Mark came home late again. I was sitting on the couch feeding the baby, and he walked past me without a word. I finally snapped and asked him what was going on, why he was always so distant. He just looked at me, shrugged, and said, "You wouldn't understand." Then he walked into the bedroom and shut the door. That's when I started to feel the doubt creeping in. I tried to convince myself that things would get better, that he was just stressed about being a new dad. But deep down I knew it wasn't just that. I didn't want to admit it, but everything was starting to feel like a lie. The late nights, the fights, the distance. It all felt wrong. I was stuck though. I had a newborn, no real support, and I felt trapped in my own life. All I could do was hope that maybe things would go back to how they used to be, but even then I had this sinking feeling that the worst was yet to come. It's crazy how life can just flip upside down without any warning. One minute you think you know the people closest to you, and the next it feels like they were strangers all along. That's how it felt when everything came crashing down for me. After my daughter was born, I was so focused on her, trying to figure out how to be a mom, that I didn't notice the cracks forming right in front of my face. It wasn't until my mom called me one afternoon that things started to unravel. It was weird, honestly, because my mom wasn't the type to check in on me out of the blue. She mostly kept her attention on my sisters, Lisa and Jenny. I remember picking up the phone, juggling my daughter in one arm, and hearing her say, "We need to talk." Her voice had this edge to it, like she was holding back something big. She told me to come over to her place and that it was important. I could feel the tension right away, and my heart sank. I knew something was up, but I couldn't imagine how bad it was going to be. I made my way to my parents' house, my mind racing the entire time. I kept thinking maybe something happened with my dad's health, or one of my sisters got into some kind of trouble. But when I got there, the way my mom looked at me, it was like she was trying to figure out how to tell me someone had died or something. She led me to the kitchen, and we sat down. That's when she dropped the bombshell. "I found out something about Mark," she said, her eyes not quite meeting mine. My stomach twisted into a knot. I was already dreading what she was about to say. "What is it?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, but I could feel my hand shaking. My mind was jumping to the worst possibilities. Maybe he was in trouble with the law, or he lost his job and didn't tell me. She hesitated for a second, then said, "He's been seeing Lisa." For a second I just sat there staring at her, like my brain couldn't process the words she just said. My own husband, the father of my child, with my older sister. It felt like the room started spinning. I remember my mouth going dry as I tried to make sense of it. "What do you mean he's been seeing her?" I managed to ask, even though I already knew. My gut was telling me everything I didn't want to believe. She explained that she caught them together, saw the way they acted around each other. At first she thought maybe she was just overthinking things, but then she overheard them arguing about me, about how they had to keep things quiet so I wouldn't find out. It was like my worst nightmare coming to life. I felt sick to my stomach, like everything I thought was true was actually a lie. But it didn't end there. As if that wasn't enough, right when I was still trying to process that my husband and my sister were sneaking around behind my back, Jenny shows up at my mom's place too. She walks in looking all pale and nervous, and my mom just gives her this look like, "You need to come clean." That's when Jenny admits that she'd been involved with Mark too. I felt my heart drop into my stomach. My younger sister, the one who used to look up to me, was sleeping with my husband. I didn't know what to say. I was just sitting there staring at them, like they were speaking a different language. How could both my sisters do this to me? My hands were shaking, and I felt this hot wave of anger, betrayal, and embarrassment wash over me. I could barely breathe. My family was the only support I had, and here they were tearing my life apart. I left without saying much. I needed to confront Mark, and I wasn't sure if I could even trust my own voice not to crack in front of them. I drove home, my mind in overdrive. I was replaying every moment from the past few months, every late night, every excuse he made. Suddenly it all made sense, and that made me feel like a fool. Like, how could I have been so blind? When I got home, Mark was there, sitting on the couch like nothing was wrong. My hands were still shaking as I walked in, and I didn't even give him time to react. "How long?" I demanded, my voice sharper than I'd ever heard it. "How long have you been messing around with my sisters?" His face went pale, and for a moment he looked like a deer caught in headlights. But then he just sat there staring at the floor, not saying a word. No excuses, no apologies, nothing. I felt the anger bubbling up inside me. "You're not even going to try to explain yourself," I shouted, feeling my voice crack. But he just stood up, grabbed his keys, and walked out the door without saying a single word. He didn't even look back. I felt like the whole world crumbled beneath me. I was left standing there alone in the apartment, holding our baby, while everything around me felt like it was falling apart. The silence after he left was deafening, and I just stood there feeling completely numb. I kept telling myself to hold it together, that I needed to be strong for my daughter, but all I felt was empty. It's one thing to find out your partner cheated, but it's another thing entirely when it's with the people you've trusted your whole life. After he left, I sat on the couch for what felt like hours, just staring at the wall. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what I was supposed to do next. I couldn't go back to my parents' place, not after that. My sisters, they weren't my sisters anymore. As far as I was concerned, they were strangers. I felt completely alone, like I was stranded on some island with no one to turn to. The worst part was that I still had to keep it together for my daughter. She was so tiny and innocent, and she needed me to be there for her. So I pulled myself together, wiped away the tears, and started packing Mark's things. I threw his clothes into garbage bags, boxed up his tools, and piled everything by the front door. If he wanted to walk out on me, he wasn't taking a damn thing with him. That night I called my parents again, and my mom tried to talk me down, saying we'd figure it out and that maybe I should try to talk to my sisters. But I was done. There was no going back for me. I told her I didn't want anything to do with Lisa or Jenny anymore. They'd crossed a line and there was no fixing it. My mom seemed hesitant, but she agreed. I guess she knew I wasn't going to budge on this. It was a long, lonely night. I barely slept, just sat there with my daughter in my arms, trying to figure out how I was going to manage everything on my own. I knew I had to be strong for her, but I felt so broken inside. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Mark's face, my sister's faces, and I felt that rage boiling up again. But I couldn't afford to fall apart. That's when I decided I wasn't going to let them ruin my life anymore. Mark might have walked out, and my sisters might have betrayed me, but I still had my daughter, and I was going to make sure she grew up knowing she was loved, even if that meant cutting out the people who hurt us. I locked the door that night, and for the first time I felt the weight of everything that had happened. But I also knew I had to start building a life for myself, one where I could protect my daughter from the mess my family had made. It wasn't going to be easy, but I was done being the victim in their story. If I'm being honest, maybe I should have seen it coming. The way my life turned out with Mark and my sisters. It wasn't that surprising when I think back to how things were when I was growing up. I wasn't the kind of kid who got the attention or the love, really. I was the one who was left to fend for myself while my sisters, Lisa and Jenny, were treated like they were made of gold. I was the middle kid, and in my family that meant I was pretty much invisible. Lisa was the oldest, so she got the firstborn privileges, new clothes, a birthday party every year, all the support in the world from my parents. And Jenny, being the youngest, was treated like a princess. Me? I was the one they forgot at school when they were busy running around with my sisters. I'd wait for hours, watching all the other kids get picked up, feeling this pit in my stomach when the clock hit 6 and I was still there. Sometimes I'd walk home alone because I knew nobody was coming. One of the worst memories I have is when I was 8. My dad was in one of his moods. He'd come home angry, complaining about his day, the bills, whatever he could find to rant about. I don't remember what set him off that time, but he was yelling at me, saying how I was always a problem, how I was nothing but a mouth to feed. I tried to stay quiet, to disappear like I always did when things got tense, but it didn't matter. He grabbed me by the arm, dragged me to the car, and threw me in the back seat. I remember feeling scared but not surprised. This wasn't the first time he'd gotten physical, and it wouldn't be the last. He drove us to the grocery store, parked, and told me to stay put. I thought he'd be back in a few minutes, but as the hours ticked by, it became clear he wasn't coming back anytime soon. It was getting dark and I just sat there staring out the window, my hands shaking because I knew I was stuck. Eventually my mom showed up. She didn't say sorry or anything. She just told me to get in her car and started lecturing me about how my dad was stressed and I needed to behave better to keep things peaceful at home. I was 8, for crying out loud. What was I supposed to do? It was always my fault when things went wrong. If the house was messy, if my dad had a bad day, if my sisters needed something, it was on me. I was the one who got the blame. My sisters, they had it so easy. Lisa was the favorite and she knew it. She'd get new clothes every season and my mom would always take her out for special days like shopping or getting their nails done together. Jenny was treated like she was a little princess, always being coddled, never told no. Meanwhile, I was in the background like a ghost. I got their hand-me-downs, their old toys, and whatever was left over. It didn't matter what I did or how hard I tried. It was never enough. I remember one Christmas when I was about 10. My parents had gotten Lisa and Jenny these brand new bikes, shiny and bright with those streamers hanging off the handlebars. They were beaming, riding them around the front yard while I stood there watching. I got a pair of shoes that didn't even fit right. My dad said they'd grow on me, but I knew they wouldn't. They were just a pair Lisa had outgrown, and they decided to wrap them up and pass them off as my Christmas gift. It sounds petty, but stuff like that sticks with you. It's not about the shoes or the toys, it's about what it meant. I was always the afterthought. My mom would say, "We do the best we can for everyone," but I knew that wasn't true. They did their best for Lisa and Jenny. I was just there, filling space. The worst of it was when I turned 12. Lisa and Jenny got invited to go on a camping trip with my parents and some of their friends. I was excited, thinking maybe this time I'd get to go too. I packed my little bag and waited by the door. But when it came time to leave, my dad told me I wasn't coming. He said someone had to stay and watch the house, and that someone was me. I stood there trying not to cry while they piled into the car, laughing and talking about the fun they were going to have. I watched as they drove off, leaving me behind again. I ended up spending the weekend alone. My parents didn't even leave food in the fridge, so I had to eat whatever canned stuff was in the pantry. It was like they didn't care, and I realized that weekend that I was never going to be a priority to them. I was just a responsibility, something they had to deal with but didn't really want. When they finally got back, they didn't even ask how I was. They just walked in, my dad patting Jenny on the head and asking Lisa if she had fun. No one looked my way. It was like I wasn't even there. I remember going up to my room and staying there for hours, just staring at the wall, feeling this emptiness. It wasn't the first time they'd forgotten about me, but it was the first time I really understood how alone I was in that house. I carried that feeling with me for years. When I met Mark, I thought I'd finally found someone who saw me, who cared. But looking back, I realized I was just so desperate for anyone to notice me that I ignored the signs. I let myself believe that he was different, that he cared about me in a way my family never did. But maybe that's what he saw in me, a lonely, invisible girl who would put up with anything just to feel loved. There was this one time when I was 14 that sticks with me. Lisa had just gotten her license, and she convinced my parents to let her borrow the car so she could drive us to the mall. It was supposed to be a fun sister outing, but when we got there, she met up with her friends and ditched me. I was wandering around the mall alone for hours, not even having enough money to buy anything. I sat in the food court, watching all the groups of people laughing and hanging out, feeling like I was the only person there who didn't belong. When Lisa finally found me, she acted like it was no big deal. "Oh, I thought you'd be fine on your own," she said, laughing it off like it was some joke. I didn't say anything. I'd learned by then that arguing wouldn't change anything. I was just glad to finally go home. But that feeling of being left behind, that's something I still can't shake, even now. By the time I was 16, I was already planning my escape. I told myself I'd get out of that house as soon as I could, get a job, and never look back. But things don't always go as planned. And when I met Mark at 17, it felt like maybe my escape had finally come. He seemed so different from my family, so ready to accept me. I thought I was finally building something for myself, something real. But now I know I was just filling a hole I'd had for years, one I didn't even realize was there. Looking back, it all makes sense. The way I held on to Mark, the way I ignored every warning sign. It was all because of how I grew up. I was used to being forgotten, so when someone finally gave me attention, I clung to it like it was my lifeline. But deep down, I guess I always knew things weren't as perfect as I made them out to be. It's just easier to live in the lie when the truth is so damn painful. After Mark walked out that day, I was left with the mess he made. I couldn't afford to sit around and feel sorry for myself, even though everything felt like it was crumbling around me. I had a newborn baby who depended on me, and I knew I had to pull it together for her. But honestly, I was just going through the motions, pretending to be okay while feeling like I was completely alone. It's funny, when you're in a crisis, people always tell you to lean on your family. But what do you do when your own family is the problem? I couldn't turn to Lisa or Jenny after what they did. They were dead to me. And my parents, they tried to help in their own way, but it was more of the same. Oh, you need to move on. Focus on your daughter. Things happen. That's easy to say when it wasn't their husband who betrayed them with their own sisters. I felt like they didn't get it. Like they couldn't really understand how deep that cut went. So I did what I could on my own. I picked up more hours at work, found a daycare that didn't cost a fortune, and did my best to adjust to being a single mom. I wasn't making much money, but I made sure we had enough to get by. Nights were the hardest though. I'd put my daughter to bed, and the apartment would get so quiet it was almost suffocating. I'd sit there staring at the walls, feeling like I'd failed at everything. It was like I'd built my whole life around this one person. And when he left, I didn't know who I was without him. A few months after Mark left, I got a letter in the mail. I recognized his handwriting right away, and my first reaction was anger. I didn't want to hear from him. As far as I was concerned, he could stay gone. But curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it anyway. He said he'd been going to therapy, dealing with some mental health and addiction issues, and that he wanted to make things right. He wrote that he knew there was no excuse for what he'd done, but he wanted to be in our daughter's life, and he wanted to try to make amends. I wasn't sure what to do with that. Part of me wanted to rip the letter up and throw it in the trash, but the other part of me felt torn. I mean, my daughter deserved to have her dad in her life, right? It wasn't her fault that he'd screwed up, and if he was really trying to change, wasn't it better for her to know him? I wrestled with those thoughts for days. I'd look at her tiny face and feel this ache in my chest, wanting to protect her from everything, but I also knew I couldn't erase the fact that Mark was her father. I ended up calling him. It was awkward, to say the least. We hadn't spoken since the day he walked out, and hearing his voice felt like reopening a wound that hadn't even begun to heal. He apologized, at least he said the words. But it's hard to know if someone really means it, or if they're just saying what they think you want to hear. He went on about how he was working on himself, that he realized how much he'd hurt me, and that he wanted to be there for our daughter. I could tell he was trying to sound sincere, but I wasn't ready to just forgive and forget. I told him straight up that I wasn't doing this for him. If he wanted to be in her life, it was for her, and he had to prove that he was serious. I said we'd start slow, maybe he could visit on weekends, but we'd keep things casual. He agreed, and for a while he actually showed up like he said he would. He brought diapers and toys, and he even helped out around the apartment sometimes. It was like he was trying to be the dad he should have been from the start. But I kept my distance. I wasn't going to fall into the trap of thinking we could be a family again. That ship had sailed. The hardest part was pretending like everything was normal when he was around. I'd sit there smiling and making small talk while inside I was still burning with anger and hurt. Every time I saw him with our daughter, I couldn't help but wonder if he was really there for her or if this was just another one of his phases. I didn't trust him, but I felt like I had to give my daughter the chance to know her father. Maybe one day she'd ask why we weren't together, and I didn't want to be the reason she missed out on having a relationship with him. It wasn't easy seeing him try to slip back into our lives. It brought up so many memories, and not the good kind. I'd see him sitting on the floor playing with our daughter, and all I could think about was the betrayal, the lies, and how he'd left me to clean up the mess he made. But I kept my mouth shut and focused on my daughter. She was the reason I was doing this, and I wasn't going to let my feelings get in the way of her having a chance to know her dad. As the months went on, we settled into a routine. He'd come over on weekends, spend a few hours with our daughter, and then leave. It was civil, but it was also strained. I'd watch him closely, waiting for the other shoe to drop, waiting for him to mess up again. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was only a matter of time before he disappeared or found some excuse to walk out again. I had friends telling me I was too soft, that I should have cut him off completely. They'd say, "You don't owe him anything after what he did." And yeah, they were probably right. But this wasn't about him. This was about my daughter, and if there was even a chance he was serious about turning his life around, I felt like I had to at least try. But it was hard. Every time he'd leave, I'd feel this wave of relief wash over me like I could finally breathe again. But then the doubt would creep in. Was I making a mistake letting him back in, even if it was just for our daughter's sake? I felt like I was walking a tightrope, trying to balance everything without falling apart. One night after he'd left, I sat down with my daughter in my arms, and she was smiling up at me, completely oblivious to all the chaos. I remember looking at her and making a promise to myself, and to her, that no matter what happened, I'd always put her first. Mark could come and go as he pleased, but I wasn't going to let him or anyone else hurt her. She was my priority now, and I was done letting other people dictate how my life would go. I started taking steps to rebuild my life without Mark at the center of it. I applied for a better job, one that paid more so I wouldn't have to depend on him. I started saving up, planning for a future where it was just me and my daughter. I wanted her to have the stability I never had, and I was determined to make that happen, even if it meant doing it alone. It wasn't easy, but little by little I felt like I was taking control again. Every time Mark came by, I kept my boundaries firm. I'd let him see his daughter, but I wouldn't let him back into my heart. I'd learned the hard way that some people don't change, no matter how much they say they will, and I wasn't going to let myself fall for the same story twice. But even with all that, there was still a part of me that hoped things would get better, that one day I'd look back and see all of this as a rough patch we'd gotten through. But for now, I was focused on one thing: making sure my daughter had the best life I could give her, whether Mark was in the picture or not. I thought things were finally starting to settle. Mark had been showing up consistently, and we'd gotten into a routine where he'd spend time with our daughter and I'd keep my distance. It was a delicate balance, but it worked. I figured as long as I kept him at arm's length, everything would stay under control. But of course, nothing stays simple for long, especially when family is involved. One evening I was going through my usual routine, making dinner, helping my daughter with her homework, when she came up to me holding her phone like it was something precious. "Mom, do you know Lisa?" she asked, her eyes wide. Hearing my older sister's name felt like a punch in the gut. I hadn't thought about her in months, and honestly, I liked it that way. I forced a smile and said, "Yeah, she's your aunt." I tried to keep my voice steady, but inside I was already on edge. "She added me on Facebook," my daughter continued, showing me her screen. "She said she wants to talk." I felt my blood run cold. It had been years since I cut Lisa and Jenny out of my life, and up until now they'd respected that. Or maybe they just didn't care enough to reach out. But now, seeing her name pop up like that, I felt this wave of anger and dread. I asked my daughter what Lisa had said exactly, and she handed me her phone. There it was, Lisa's message, acting all friendly and sweet, saying how much she missed her niece and wanted to reconnect, to make up for lost time. She didn't say anything specific, but I knew exactly what she was doing. She was trying to worm her way back into our lives without dealing with me directly. And the worst part was my daughter was too young to see the manipulation for what it was. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my composure. Did she say anything else? I asked, scrolling through the messages. She said there were some things I should know, but that it wasn't her place to tell me, my daughter replied, looking confused. She told me to ask you about it. I could feel the anger building up. It was just like Lisa to drop a hint and then back off, making me look like the bad guy who had to explain everything. I knew she was trying to force my hand, trying to get me to bring up the past so she could swoop in and play the victim. I wanted to protect my daughter from all of it, but I also knew I couldn't hide the truth forever. I took her phone and told her I needed a minute. I went into the other room and dialed Lisa's number. I hadn't called her in years, and my hands were shaking as I waited for her to pick up. When she finally answered, I could practically hear the fake sweetness in her voice. "Hey sis," she said, like nothing had ever happened. "Long time no talk. What do you think you're doing?" I snapped. I didn't have time for her games. "Why are you messaging my daughter?" Lisa sighed, and I could picture her rolling her eyes. "Look, I just wanted to reach out. It's been years and I thought maybe it was time to mend things. She deserves to know her family." "Her family?" I repeated, my voice getting louder. "The same family that betrayed me? The same family that I cut off for a reason?" She had the nerve to act all innocent. "I'm trying to make things right, okay? We're adults now, we need to move on." I felt my blood boiling. "You don't get to decide when it's time to move on, Lisa. You don't get to mess with my daughter's head because you suddenly feel like playing auntie." She didn't respond right away, and I could tell I'd hit a nerve. But instead of apologizing, she tried a different tactic. "Look, I know we made mistakes, but we're still sisters. We can't keep living like this. And your daughter, she deserves to know her family." I hung up. I couldn't do it. I knew if I stayed on the line, I'd end up saying things I couldn't take back, and I didn't want to stoop to her level. Instead, I went back to my daughter, who was sitting on the couch waiting for me to explain. "Mom, is something wrong?" she asked, her eyes full of worry. I sat down next to her and took a deep breath. This was the moment I'd been dreading ever since Mark came back into the picture. "There's something I need to tell you," I started, my voice shaking a little. "It's about why you've never met your aunts." She looked at me, her eyes wide, and I could see the confusion and concern. I tried to keep my voice calm as I explained that years ago, before she was born, her dad and I were married and things went really wrong. I told her that Mark had an affair with both of my sisters. I left out the messy details, but I didn't sugarcoat it either. I wanted her to understand that what they did was a betrayal, and that's why I chose to keep them out of our lives. She just sat there taking it all in. I could see the hurt in her eyes and it broke my heart. "Why didn't you tell me before?" she asked, her voice small. "I didn't want you to feel caught in the middle," I said. "I wanted you to have a relationship with your dad, and I didn't want my issues with your aunts to get in the way of that." She was quiet for a long time, and I could tell she was processing everything. "I don't want to talk to her," she finally said, her voice firm. "I don't want anything to do with her." I nodded, trying to hide the relief I felt. "That's your choice, and I'll support you no matter what." Later that night, Mark called me. I knew it was coming. Lisa had probably run to him complaining about how unfair I was being. He didn't waste any time getting to the point. "Why did you tell her?" he demanded, his voice sharp. "You know this is just going to make things harder for her." "She deserved to know the truth," I shot back. "She's old enough to make her own decisions, and I wasn't going to lie to her." Mark let out an annoyed sigh. "You should have thought about how this would affect her relationship with me. You didn't need to drag our past into it." I felt the anger boiling up again. "I didn't drag anything into it, Mark. Your sister-in-law did that when she decided to contact our daughter behind my back. And if you think I'm going to lie to her to protect you, then you haven't changed at all." He tried to argue, but I cut him off. "Look, if you want a relationship with her, that's between you and her. I'm done trying to manage this for you." We ended the call, and I felt this weight lift off my shoulders. For so long I'd tried to keep everything peaceful, to protect my daughter from the ugliness of the past, but it wasn't my job to cover up Mark's mistakes or pretend that my sisters hadn't betrayed me. If Lisa wanted to force my hand, then fine. she could deal with the consequences. Over the next few days, my daughter asked me a lot of questions. She wanted to know more about her dad, about what happened between us and why I didn't have contact with my sisters. I told her the truth, but I also made it clear that she didn't have to choose sides. If she ever wanted to know them, I wouldn't stand in her way. But she was firm. She didn't want anything to do with them, and she didn't want to talk to her dad either, at least not for now. It hurt to see her so upset, but I also felt a sense of relief. The truth was out, and I didn't have to pretend anymore. I'd protected her for as long as I could, but she deserved to make her own choices, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally letting go of the past.